Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Wednesday, July 17th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about the ACC. There was some more news around Florida State and Clemson, and it might just be the Big 12 pushing more and more in that direction, and how I think it's going to start a little bit of a landslide here in the ACC that will happen fairly quickly, if I had to imagine. But then we'll get into UGA. I tend to believe this might just be Kirby Smart's best team he's had at UGA, and I'll break down why I think that and why I think this team's just a little bit different than the ones that he's had in past years. Then we'll get into a conversation that has gone around pretty much ad nauseum at this point. Horns Down was asked about rules in the SEC. They were asked, is Horns Down going to be a penalty going forward? And obviously it will not be, depending on the case, but we'll break down why that conversation to me has just become outright nauseating, if I'm being totally honest. And then we'll get into hinge players in each conference. We're going to start in the SEC today, and we'll make our way around throughout the next couple of weeks. Then we'll get into Wednesday what-ifs, and we'll do kind of a rivalry edition this time around, break down some of the biggest what-ifs and some of the big rivalries around the country, a ton that could happen this year, and flip those on their head, that's for sure. But then, before we jump in, excuse me, I apologize for that. We got tons of graphics today, so we will get there, I promise. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to kind of have a fun, interactive experience here, and that's always good for everyone. So definitely use that, gsmcpodcast.net, if you need. So let's jump in. I apologize. We messed this up a little bit. I am very, very sorry about this. Let's see what we got here. Okay, we will work with this for today. I very much apologize. But the ACC is where I want to start, not the atmospheres. But the ACC is kind of staring down a very, very tough time in their future of the as a conference. There's definitely a lot of things up in the air for them as they move into kind of this new era of what they're under. But let's check out and make sure that this is what I want. Yes, it is. So the ACC is under a ton of pressure going into this next little bit, and Greg Sankey spoke on this in the SEC Media Days. He said he was focused on his 16 teams. They're not too much worried about adding anyone else at this very moment. They're kind of just focused on moving forward as their two. Paul Feinbaum added to that, saying if they were going to add anyone, it would be a North Carolina. It would be that type of team, maybe a Duke as well. So Florida State and Clemson, not necessarily towards the top of the list when you talk about the ACC. And I think for the past 9 months, it's kind of felt like it's been a ton of different entities kind of attacking the ACC from a ton of different directions. There's been so much going into these battles that they've been kind of fighting back and forth. And I think one of the big things that I've kind of noticed is it feels like everyone's just waiting for that first thing to happen. They're waiting for that first domino to fall. They're waiting for that first, bite to be taken out of the ACC, and then it'll be a free-for-all. So Florida State and Clemson are obviously going to be that first domino that falls, and I think one of the biggest things is, to my knowledge, at least from where I'm standing, they have about 3 options going forward, and it's go to the Big 12, which I think is likely the number one option at this very moment for both those schools, just because I think them going back to the ACC would be a little bit tough with the energy that has been created between the two, and also I think they feel that that's probably the best way for them to go forward. So I think that's option number 1. I think option number 2 is go back to the ACC, and that would be a very, very awkward conversation. That would be something that would be really, really interesting to watch for a number of different reasons. But at the end of the day, it would be very, very weird and definitely something that I don't necessarily expect to happen, but the reality is, if the Big 12 does not have that revenue to bring those schools in and make it worth their while, maybe that's an option for them. And then finally, the other option is really go independent or just beg the SEC to let you in. And that's not going to happen. I'll be totally honest with you. So really, there's 2 options, but this one is always out there if they want to take it. Obviously, this would kind of torpedo them in a lot of different ways and discussions going forward with college football. But at the end of the day, I do think it would be very, very interesting to watch that kind of unfold, because there would be a lot of questions. And I think the biggest thing here that everyone, has talked about them possibly going to the Big 12 and what that would mean, and, why would they go to the Big 12 and all of those different things. And the biggest thing for me is the Big 12 has something the ACC doesn't, and that's Brett Yormark. Their commissioner is, frankly, one of the most aggressive guys in the sport at this very moment. Other than the guys that strap it up on Saturdays, he is the one that is out for blood the most. The dude is going absolutely crazy on the conference realignment front and doing the absolute world to make sure that they are set up to be a top conference going forward. That's what he said at Big 12 Media Days. He said he wants to be the number one conference in the country. I said earlier that's going to take quite some time to pull off, but at the end of the day, it'll be really, really interesting to watch all of that unfold, because this is a very, very powerful guy, someone that can do a lot of really, really incredible things, and someone that'll be just fascinating to watch kind of unfold over the next little bit. And he's going to be aggressive in a lot of different ways, and the biggest way is going to be private equity. This guy is a businessman. He understands what the bottom line is, and in a lot of ways, especially in college sports right now, it's revenue. How much revenue do you have? How much are you kind of putting into that pot? And that's the biggest question for the ACC moving forward. The Big 12 as well, but they're being a little bit more proactive in selling some of their rights, getting some of those sponsorship deals, getting some of the things that, the ACC has not quite been as aggressive, at least outwardly as aggressive in terms of getting. So I think that's the biggest difference is Florida State and Clemson could stay where they're at. They could absolutely stay pat and be more than fine with where they're at. But at the end of the day, you need a little bit more money going forward. That's just the reality of this sport. The people that are, running the sport, that are doing incredible things, they tend to have the most money. That's just the reality. And if Florida State and Clemson are going to make the jump to another, second tier conference like the Big 12, they're going to end up needing more money. They're going to end up needing a little bit of help getting out of that conference and doing some of the things that are going to be a little bit tough for the ACC to counter, or for the SEC and the Big Ten to really care to do, because that's one of the other big things about the future of the sport is we're really playing about 3 or 4 different sports all at the same time. And they're split in terms of tiers of how much money do you have. And you get to make different decisions based on how much money you have. So the SEC and the Big Ten are sitting there, frankly, they don't have to move a muscle. They don't have to do much of anything if they don't want to, because the reality is they can, play around with this thing. They can do so many different things and not necessarily have to worry about the financial ramifications, because money's coming in, and it's coming in very, very quickly. So I do think that's part of this, where the SEC and the Big Ten might not be the aggressors right now because they don't need to be. They can sit back and just kind of watch all this happen, watch this unfold, and then when the first person takes a bite out of the ACC, which seems to be Brett Yormark in the Big 12, they're ready to jump in. I fully believe that that's kind of the case, and I think it's going to be somewhat of a free-for-all. Florida State and Clemson obviously are not, I've said this before, they're not the biggest things in the ACC in terms of college football. They are, but in terms of, a number of different things that go into a conference realignment, they're not towards the top. That's just the reality of the situation. But UNC, Duke, those are the teams that SEC is going to come after, and I think they're just waiting for the ACC to get a little bit wounded. I've kind of used this metaphor before talking about the ACC, but it feels like a bunch of hyenas just attacking one lion, although the ACC is not much of a lion right now, but just bear with me here. I do think it's one of those things where they're just waiting for the most confident, the most desperate hyena to take that first bite. Once that happens, then I think everyone else is piling on. And I think that comes in the form of maybe Miami finding their way up to the Big Ten because they're an AAU school, which seems to be a very, very strict moniker for the Big Ten going forward. Maybe SMU finds their way to the Big 12, even though that was a bit of a weird situation last time around. Georgia Tech could make their way back to the SEC or up to the Big Ten because they are another AAU school. So there's a ton of different variables here, but the reality is something's going to happen around that team and likely Clemson. I tend to believe they're going to move in tandem here, but something's going to happen around these teams very, very quickly. Whether that's, they're not going to play in the ACC in 2025 or they're not going to play going forward. I don't know what that entirely looks like, if I'm being totally honest. But I do think it's going to be very interesting to watch. I do think it's going to be something that is going to happen fairly quickly. And once that first bite is taken out, once Florida State and Clemson have found their new home, likely the Big 12, but we'll see what happens. Maybe they find their way back to the ACC and none of this is a problem. But I do think if they find their way to the Big 12, it is the start of just eating the ACC alive. I think the Big 10 and the SEC know that they don't have to put in a ton of money to help a lot of these teams get out of the conference. And if they were to put up the money for Florida State and Clemson and, give up a ton of their revenue to do that, then they wouldn't have the ability to go out and get North Carolina, go out and get Duke. So I think that would be kind of the path that I'm seeing happen here is Florida State and Clemson find their way to the Big 12. They're there for a couple of years. Maybe they're making, a little bit less, but more money than they were making in the ACC, but still less than the big dogs. And the SEC can bring in UNC, and the Big 10 can bring in Miami or whoever they want. And then in about 3 years, they can look back and say, okay, now we'll take Florida State and Clemson because we have bigger revenue, we have more money to throw around, and the Big 12 will be in a position where you're still going to be below these guys. So you're still going to be punching up, and it's still going to be really, really hard to figure that out. So we had a Power 5 about a year ago at this point. It's about to be a Power 3, and it's going to happen fairly quickly here, I think. So it's very kind of upsetting more than anything else. I'm firmly a believer in the regionality of the sport, but that's gone. And we kind of have to just kind of move on from that, if I'm being totally honest, and just kind of let these things happen. It'll be really, really interesting to watch this unfold. But at the end of the day, I do think Florida State and Clemson will be out of the ACC here pretty soon. And then I think it's somewhat of a free-for-all. So we'll definitely break that down as it happens. But we'll take our first break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about Kirby Smart and how I think this might just be the best UGA team he has ever had. So we'll break that down right after this. So stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about the ACC and how they could just be staring down the end of their conference. Definitely will be a very interesting thing to watch. But let's get into UGA and talk about, is this the best team in Kirby Smart's era at UGA? And I apologize, we were having some technical difficulties. The things that I tried to update yesterday for the show did not update. So we have a little bit of a trouble here, but I promise I will get that fixed by tomorrow, and we should have no problems moving forward. But we're going to start with that guy, and at least we have some of the stuff. We will not have the lower thirds, but promise that will be totally fixed. But let's jump in, and Kirby Smart has had some ridiculous teams at UGA, and frankly, I used this picture just because I thought it was funny more than anything else. But UGA obviously has had just ridiculous teams during Kirby Smart's time. They've won 2 titles. They've done things on the defensive side of the ball that have been historic in every single sense of the word, and I look at this team a little bit differently, and I look at this team, frankly, as the best team that he's had at UGA, and I know that sounds a little bit far-fetched, and there are a ton of teams, including the 2021 team that I believe every single defensive player is currently playing in the NFL. That's going to be tough to beat. There's no two ways about that, but there's this one thing that I think separates this team from every other Kirby Smart team, and that's this offense. I think it's totally different than it's been in years past, and I think the guy calling the shots is the best that he's had there in quite some time. Carson Beck is an absolute beast. He does things on the football field that are frankly unfair. I've seen this kid make passes that are just mesmerizing. He makes NFL throws on a daily basis. Like, he could roll out of bed at 3 a.m. and make throw a post to the corner of the end zone and throw it on a dime. The dude is absolutely incredible in the pocket, and one of the things that Kirby Smart said, which we'll get to here in a little bit, but he said this is the best O-line he's had at UGA. If that's the case, and this guy can just sit back there and pick apart defenses, everyone else is screwed. I'm just being totally honest. There's not a defense in the country that can stop this kid if he has the amount of time that Kirby Smart expects him to have in this offense. So that's a ridiculous addition. Trevor Etienne is another one that's absolutely out of this world. You added him from Florida. That will add a little bit of juice to that game, but also that's always been an elite position at Georgia. And frankly, this is not quite the level of some other groups that Kirby has had, but you have Trevor Etienne, you have Roderick Robinson, you have Branson Robinson hopefully coming back from injury pretty quickly and being able to get on the field. They'll be more than fine at that position is mainly the point here. I think that one is one that I'm not worried about at all, if I'm being totally honest. And then the wide receivers is the difference maker. The wide receivers and tight ends is where I think the gap starts to form, because UGA has had really good receivers. Ladd McConkey was just incredible for a couple of years there at UGA, but when I look at this UGA roster, I'm not lying. I think there's 7 or 8 guys that actually could go for 100 yards in a game this year. I do think there are those people that across the board, you have Dominic Lovett, obviously, is going to be likely the leading receiver in this group. You have Ra Thomas. You have Colby Young coming in from Miami. You have so many other, London Humphreys coming in from Vandy, Dylan Bell. It's just ridiculous, the amount of guys that they have to play around with, and that doesn't even include my favorite guy of the bunch, which is Anthony Evans. I think he is an absolute monster and someone that is going to win Georgia a game with a punt return or a deep play or whatever it is sometime this season. So it's ridiculous what they have there, but the tight end room is another one that is always good. They're just always, Todd Hartley is one of the best position coaches in the entire country, and he's got a really good group again. Oscar Delp is leading the way in my eyes, but Ben Urasek is going to have a huge role in this offense because Mike Bobo likes his tight ends. And then Lawson Lucky, I think, likely will get on the field a little bit more often this upcoming season. So, frankly, I could easily make the argument this tight end room is stronger than a year ago. Even without Brock Bowers, I understand that is the biggest loss they possibly could have had, because if you were to ask me, that is the best tight end I've ever seen in college football. But when you add someone like Urasek, when Delp gets a year older, when Lawson Lucky gets a year older, when you add someone, I'm blanking on the kid's name, Jason Rydell, who's a fantastic freshman, it feels like this group is just a little bit more well-rounded and a little bit more experienced than the year past. And although you don't have the just monster that Brock Bowers was, I think this tight end room didn't take the step back that some people might think that it did. And then the O-line, we talked about it. It's the best that Kirby Smart has seen during his time, and he knows something about good O-lines. But Tate Ratledge was the big thing here. He easily could have gone to the NFL, easily could have gotten drafted in the 2nd or 3rd round, and likely would have been, I don't want to say a starter right away, but would have started pretty quickly at the NFL level. That's how good this kid is, but he decided to come back. You add that to Dylan Fairchild, another one of the best guards in the country. Xavier Truss and Ernest Green on the corners are just out of this world. And then Jared Curtis steps in for Cedric Van Pran at center, but the reality is Jared Curtis might be the most popular guy among that coaching staff right now. He is so athletic, so good, and is stepping into that position, and they might just not skip a beat at that position. And Cedric Van Pran was darn good. But let's move on to the defense, and we did lose some of the slides here, so it'll be a little bit less visual in this one. But the 2021 and 22 defenses were all-time. They were absolutely out of this world. They were incredible in every sense of the word. This one's a little bit different. It's not quite as strong as the ones in the past, but they still have dudes, and they're still going to be one of the best in the country. Nazir Stackhouse is the guy I want to talk about. That's him running back a pick six from a year ago against Missouri. That was just awesome to watch. But you have Nazir Stackhouse, you have Warren Brinson, Christian Miller, Xavier McLeod in the interior, which is where you kind of are worried, but I think between those four guys, you're going to have plenty of disruption in the interior. And then Michael Williams. I think he's a top 15, 20 player in the country. He is an absolute beast on the outside. Chaz Chambliss is someone that UGA fans have a little bit of a mixed opinion on, I've found, but I do think this is a very, very smart player that only gets better with time and is just going to be in the right spot. He's not going to have to make those really crazy athletic plays that, Michael Williams or Jalen Walker can make, but he just needs to be in the right place and make the right tackle at the right time. So I think that's something that he absolutely can do, and it'll be really, really awesome to watch him develop. And then you add in guys like Jalen Walker, Damon Wilson, Ingram Dawkins, all of those guys coming off the edge. They're going to be very disruptive. And then the linebacker room is the other one that has kind of defined UGA under Kirby Smart and even before that. And I apologize, that's Michael Williams right there. I should have talked about him a little bit more. He's someone that is an absolute disruptor, possibly the best player on this team, and that's where my pictures end, so I apologize for that. But the linebacker room is ridiculous. CJ Allen is a Roquan Smith level player. I truly believe he is out of this world, one of those players that can totally transform that position. Add him in to Smile Mondon, who could be missing time. Kirby Smart did say there would be suspensions for the incidents that happened last week, so we'll see what happens there. But Raylan Wilson is elite. Samuel Mpemba's coming in, who I think is just going to be out of this world good. And then Jalen Walker will play some linebacker, and Troy Bowles. It's just insane the depth they have at that position. And then you go to the back end, and Malachi Starks is the guy. He's the one that everyone is going to point to. He's the best coverage safety in the country, if you were to ask me. And then you have Ja'Cory Thomas stepping into a big-time position. Going to need him to play big. And then you have Johnny Aguero also stepping into a big-time position in that back end. Both of them are going to have to step up huge because Johnny Aguero has taken over for one of the most important guys over the last couple of years for Georgia and Javon Bullard. So that'll be really, really fun to watch, and definitely the back end has a little bit of worry, but I think they're going to be more than fine. And the corners are really where the worry kind of sets in a little bit more aggressively. Julian Humphrey and Dalen Everett will be the starters at corner, and I think both of them are very, very good players. Julian Humphrey is one of those guys that I think has only started to scratch the ceiling of what he can be because the athleticism is just off the charts insane. Once those ball skills and some of the physicality comes along a little bit further, he's going to be just out of this world. And then Daniel Harris will play tons. Ellis Robinson, the freshman, I think will get some spots. So I think cornerback position is going to be a huge hinge spot. Can they play the coverage they need to play against some just ridiculous wide receivers that they're going to face? I tend to believe they're going to be able to do that, but maybe there's a couple of moments where Georgia just gets taken advantage of on the back end. And then you add in a guy like Peyton Woodring, who's one of the best kickers in the country, and Brett Thorson, who is one of my favorite players in the country just because of the off-the-field antics. He's just so much fun. I absolutely love his Twitter. He's just really one of those guys that if you don't know about him, learn about him pretty quickly because he's really, really funny. But at the end of the day, UGA is turning into an absolute powerhouse. They're going to be really, really elite until further notice. There's no two ways about that. They will have elite players. They will have probably the best roster in the country for quite some time to come. Ohio State kind of stole that from them this year, but if the normal people that were meant to leave from Ohio State actually did, UGA would be the most talented, and I think that's going to be the case for quite some time. But when I look at this team, it's just different than other Kirby Smart's teams. I think it fits together better than some other teams did. I think having that best O-line and best wide receivers, along with what I would argue is the best quarterback he's had during his time. Don't get me wrong, Stetson Bennett is out of this world and someone that I think, frankly, Carson Beck cannot jump in terms of UGA quarterback rankings this year, but from a pure football perspective, I think he's the better player. And then you look at the defensive side, and I think they just have a slew of pass rushers that are going to be incredible. And then you add that into CJ Allen and Malachi Starks that are all-American level players. It's just going to be ridiculous. And the cool thing about this is I said all of that, and I believe all of that this is Kirby Smart's best team. This is one of his most talented teams. This is one of his most scary teams for a number of different reasons, mostly because of the way that it fits together. I don't think that makes them your outright national title winner. I don't think that absolutely guarantees them a title because I think this is Ryan Day's best Ohio State team. I think it's Dan Lanning's best Oregon team. I think it's Steve Sarkisian's best Texas team. So I do think there is this energy around Georgia that is a little bit different. I think they're stronger than they have been in past, especially on the offensive side of the ball, but everyone else is too. So they're going to be battling with some really good teams, and that's another reason why I'm so excited for this season, because it feels like no one's above anyone else, and everyone is really good on top of that. So those 4 teams are obviously the ones kind of setting the pace, and I think it's going to be really, really interesting to watch them develop, because it's going to be fascinating to see if this is the best team that Kirby's ever had, and if that kind of shows itself throughout the season, or another one of these best teams that Ryan Day or that Dan Lanning or that Steve Sarkisian's ever had could throw a wrench into that. But let's take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about horns down. This is a conversation that, frankly, has become a little bit exhausting in college football, but it came up in SEC Media Days, so I'll break down my thoughts and why I just don't understand why anyone cares. But at the end of the day, we'll break that down right after this.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about UGA and how I think this might just be Kirby Smart's best team he's had at UGA, and that is a scary prospect for a lot of teams out there, but will be a very, very interesting thing to watch. And just a reminder, we are going through a couple of struggles with some of the lower third graphics. Definitely did not save what I did yesterday, but more than fine. We'll let the show go on and kind of get underway. But we're going to talk about horns down. And one of the big things that has kind of been surrounding the SEC Media Days over the last couple of days has been this debate around horns down, around is it going to be a penalty in the SEC? It was in the Big 12, so obviously this is a question that SEC fans and players and coaches want to know the answer to. So the SEC coordinator of officials, John McDade, was asked about this, and first of all, he said it's kind of a goofy conversation. He feels like it's kind of a weird thing to be asking, but regardless, the answer was essentially it depends on the context. It depends on the case-by-case basis. If an opponent scores a touchdown against Texas and does the celebration not at anyone or anything aggressive, more than fine. No problem there. If they do it, standing over a player after hitting them or after, tackling them, whatever, then you get into the taunting realm and you can get into a little bit of an issue. So I fully understand that, and I think that totally makes sense. Frankly, I'm a big advocate of letting guys stand over others and kind of letting taunting be a little bit allowed more than it is right now. I tend to believe these guys are professional football players at this point, and if you hit someone really hard and you want to talk a little bit of smack to them, I have no problem with that. But at the end of the day, I understand you got to draw the line somewhere. I understand that certain things just have to happen, and this is one of them. You have to draw the line. You have to make sure that no one is taunting, no one is, doing anything aggressive towards another person, and I suppose that makes sense. Frankly, I think that taunting should be something that is very, very specific. Like if you make physical contact with someone or you say something truly, truly terrible. But for the most part, I think let the guys say what they're going to say. It's on the football field. The emotions are always going to run high. There's going to be insane amounts of adrenaline and physical contact and a lot of different things that bring out that emotion, and kind of holding that in just doesn't feel like the right way to go about business. But that's kind of a side point. I feel like I'm not going to win that battle with a lot of the officials out there. So that's just kind of the way that I look at it. I think if they're going to play football, it's going to be aggressive, and they're going to have moments where they don't necessarily love the other one. So I think there's going to be a little bit of trash talk, and I'm more than on board for that. So, but getting back to this conversation around horns down, sincerely, I've asked this question pretty much 10,000 times since this has come up, and as it's been kind of brought back up every single time that we have these conversations. And the biggest one is just, who cares? I'm having a hard time figuring out who cares and why they care. And I know that there are Texas fans that care because I'm a Texas fan. I grew up a Texas fan, am a huge one to this day, and likely will be till I die. And I can't speak for other Texas fans and their experiences. Personally, I love horns down. I think it is one of the best things about college football because it is college football. It's the perfect encapsulation of what makes this sport different. It is hatred just because of the color that someone else is wearing. I love that. I think that is so cool. I absolutely love Texas. I love college football way more, and horns down is absolutely incredible for the sport of college football. So that I am fully on board with. I can't speak for other people, but overall, the people that I've interacted with in that space, the Texas fans that I have interacted with on social media or in other spaces, 95% don't really care or kind of like it. And some like it because they think it means that we're always on their mind. Some like it because they think it shows that Texas is a superior brand. I don't necessarily care about all that. I just like it because it's really clean, old-fashioned hate, and that's the good thing about college football. But at the end of the day, it's insane to me that anyone would care. And I understand that Texas fans do care. There have been a number of instances around Texas that have not been great around this, where people have cared, and I've been just flabbergasted by those people. But at the end of the day, the conversation has kind of popped up at different moments, and there have been a couple of different moments. Sam Ehlinger had a tweet way back in the day that was a little bit grandiose for my taste, that I didn't necessarily love in the moment, but it was kind of talking down on people that do horns down and saying, we'll remember everyone that does horns down, and we'll remember that the next time we face off. It's a little bit goofy. And then Rodney Terry, obviously the basketball coach over at Texas, screaming at the UCF players for doing horns down. It's created a little bit of an energy around Texas that everyone around Texas absolutely hates this thing and is offended every time that it's flashed in front of them, and goes off in a corner and cries. And I think that's something that, maybe it happens to a number of different people. Maybe there are some Texas fans out there that get really upset by this. I think they're really weird people, but that's beside the point. The Big 12 is one of the biggest things in this because they made it a penalty during their Texas time in the Big 12, and it was frankly just plainly the wrong decision. And I'm sure there were some people in the Texas decision makers, the boosters, whoever, what have you, that were pushing for it to be banned, that were pushing for it to be penalized. But it really all came to a head in 2012 when Texas Tech was in Lubbock, or Texas was in Lubbock facing Texas Tech, and Texas receiver Mike Davis was flagged for an unsportsmanlike conduct penalty for holstering his gun, which, if you know anything about Texas Tech, they do a guns up signal. So essentially same type of deal, right? You turn what they have as their sign, you turn it upside down, and you make it look goofy. That's kind of the way horns down works, same way that this worked. And that's where it started. Horns down was not a penalty at that time, and Mac Brown thought that was incorrect. If guns down was going to be a penalty, horns down should likely be a penalty too. And frankly, I think he's right. I think that there's a fair argument to be made there that if this one symbol that is absolutely unacceptable to do to a fan base, then the other one should be as well, right? But at the end of the day, the Big 12 made the wrong decision on the other side of it. And I'm not saying that Texas wasn't pressuring them to make that decision, because I tend to believe there were a lot of people that were. I'm just saying the Big 12 very easily could have just said, yeah, they probably shouldn't have called that, and moved on and said, it's going to not be a penalty. We're going to move forward because it's college football. I've been a part of the Texas fandom for quite some time now, and I've interacted with a lot of people, and I've had a lot of conversations about horns down, and I've had a couple of friends that have done horns down quite a bit to me throughout high school and things, and I love it. I think it's a really, really great thing about college football that we can have these moments between two fan bases that maybe they haven't ever met, but you're walking across the street and you see a fan in the Oklahoma shirt and you're wearing a Texas shirt. He flashes horns down at you, you flash horns up at him. That's good energy. It always has been, it always will be, and I don't understand why it was ever a penalty in the Big Ten. I think that's one that is just outright ridiculous for like 10,000 different reasons, the fact that it was a penalty, but also there's no world where it should be a penalty in the SEC. You have a chance to right a wrong that the Big 12 made. Do it. Please do it. And please don't let any, Texas brass or big swingers in the Texas market come in and try to influence decisions. And that's another thing that's been coming up in SEC media days, this idea that Texas is going to come in and ruin the SEC and run the conference. I can promise you that's not the case. If Texas thinks that's the case, if Chris Del Conte is sitting in his office thinking that he swings a bigger hammer than Greg Sankey, he's just entirely wrong, and he's going to be in for a rude awakening. And I don't think Texas necessarily thinks that way. So obviously, this should be not a penalty. This should be a part of the sport, and frankly, I would love to see it more often. I think it's an absolutely awesome way to show that you hate this specific school. It starts young, as you can obviously see, and it's just good energy. It's something that I talked about before, but college football needs a little bit of hate. It doesn't need to be aggressive. It doesn't need to be, going after people or, being hateful, but it needs a little bit of anger. It needs a little bit of hate, and it needs a little bit of weird hate, the hate that you're just wearing the wrong colors type of hate. I love that. I think that's really, really good energy, and it shouldn't be a penalty overall. Like, just in summation, it shouldn't be a penalty. As a Texas fan, I absolutely love it for so many different reasons, mostly because I like college football more than I like Texas, and that is college football right there. There's no two ways about that. But also, if you're someone that is offended by horns down, you're a Texas fan that absolutely hates it, and you think that it disrespects your school, and you think it's wildly unfair and taunting and whatever, all I can really say is grow up. All I can really say is, realize that Texas is not the biggest thing in the world, and that it's not even the biggest thing in college football right now. So grow up, figure it out. Horns down should be a part of college football moving forward, and we should just stop talking about it. Let the guys do what they're going to do. Let the guys get in each other's faces a little bit. Let the guys throw the horns down. Let the guys play football. I don't understand why we keep trying to police celebrations. It's a very, very weird thing that has happened in sports in general, but especially in football, and it's very, very frustrating. Horns down is one of those things that, yeah, it does make me a little bit angry when I see it because, it is kind of going against my school, but it doesn't mean I don't love the sentiment behind it. It doesn't mean I don't love the energy behind it and the fact that it is part of what makes college football special. So I understand that this is going to be a conversation. As sure as I'm sitting here talking to you guys, there is going to be a conversation about this throughout the season, and I'm going to be frustrated all over again. But at the end of the day, I just wish we would retire this one, not make it a penalty, and just let the guys play. So that's kind of my take on that. Just wanted to get that in today's show. But we'll take our third break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about hinge players in the SEC. We're going to go through all the conferences, but start in the SEC today, and I have 5 guys that could totally turn this conference on its head. So I'll break that down right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all of the things going on around horns down and how that was a big topic of conversation at SEC Media Days yesterday, and how I am just exhausted by that conversation, if I'm being totally honest with you. But we'll get into hinge players in the SEC. Again, apologies for all of the technical difficulties today. none of the things that I did yesterday updated the way that I wanted them to. So we're dealing with a little bit of trouble with the lower third graphics, but we're doing our best. But I wanted to get into hinge players in the SEC and a couple of players that I think could just turn this conference on its head, that if they hit the right way this upcoming season, could totally change the way that we look at this conference at the end of the season. So let's start to get into these guys, and I think the biggest guy that I want to start with is Nico Iamaleava. I think this might be number one in this category, maybe number two after a guy that I'm going to come up here in a second, but he holds a ton of power over what this conference can be, because when you were watching Hendon Hooker in 2022, it was special. It was really, really incredible to watch up until the devastating ACL injury that I think really hurt everyone that was impartial to Tennessee, everyone that wasn't a UGA, Bama, those type of fans. I think everyone hated to see him go down because the season that he was putting together was magical, and after everything that he had been throughout college, it was a very, very cool thing to see. But at the end of the day, it gave us an idea of what Tennessee can be. It was that, spark. It was that, you see it off in the distance and that light at the end of the tunnel saying, oh, that's what they can be in the future. That's what they're capable of if they have those things in place. And I got to be honest, guys, this is a better team than the one in 2022. If you're talking about the wide receivers, I think they're better this year than they were in 2022. I mean, you have guys like Squirrel White, you have Brew McCoy, you have Mike Matthews coming in as a young player. Chris Brazzell coming in from Tulane is absolutely huge for that team. You have Chaz Nimrod. It's ridiculous the number of guys they have on that field, and maybe they don't have a Jalen Hyatt on the field. Maybe they don't have a Cedric Tillman, but they have a lot of guys that are going to play really, really good football, and frankly, I could argue Squirrel White might look a little bit like Jalen Hyatt this upcoming season, but we'll see what happens there. I also do think this is a guy that really can be the best Tennessee quarterback we've seen since Peyton Manning. And I know that sounds insane to say because anytime you say anything around Tennessee with Peyton Manning, it always sounds insane. But I really do mean that. I think this is a kid that over the next 2 years could do things that Tennessee fans have not seen in a really, really long time and have missed for a really, really long time. And I think he's one of those guys. Obviously, the hype is through the roof for this kid going into this year, and he's definitely going to be one of the guys that's under a big-time microscope. But I think he's one of those guys that just is always comfortable. I've never seen him in a situation where he feels rushed or he feels nervous or he feels like he's, forcing anything. And that's kind of the biggest thing that you need as a freshman is making sure that you can go out there and say, I'm just going to play good football today. I'm not going to make mistakes. I'm not going to let all of this other outside stuff get to me, and I'm just going to go execute the way that I know to execute. So I think that's something that he's going to really thrive in, and when you have Josh Heupel calling plays, a lot of things can go right for you, that's for sure. So I think this is a kid that the ceiling is obviously through the roof. If he can hit that this year, Tennessee is a team that not only can win the SEC, but can find their way really close to a national title. Maybe not win it, but I don't know. They're definitely a team to watch, that's for sure. But then Harold Perkins is the other guy that I'm really watching closely because this one's a little bit different. Because when you look at LSU, the defense is not going to be good. Just plain and simple. It's going to be a pretty rough season. Now, they could be much better than they were a year ago, and they could do some things to at least give them a couple extra wins here and there, but it's not going to be top 25, top 50 in the country. I would bet they'll be somewhere in the 70, 80 mark. And then next year, I think, could be a massive jump. At the end of the day, this is a kid that could just be a game wrecker. And I think LSU might just need that. When you look across this defense, that's the only guy, to me, that stands out as he can take over a game. He can be the person that when you have a game that you're going up against Ole Miss, let's say, that's a huge game on the schedule for LSU if they want to, get up to SEC contention this year. If Harold Perkins walks on that field and is truly just dynamic and the play calling is perfect, and that's one of the big questions around him is how are they going to use him and is it going to be the most effective way? That will obviously hinge on this. But the reality is he's someone that can just straight up take over a game. He can have a ton of sacks. He can drop back into coverage and maybe get a pick. He is someone that LSU's defense just outright needs to be a monster this upcoming year if they're going to be the team that they're capable of being. So the offense is going to be awesome. I feel really good about that. I think the O-line is just the O-line's the best in the country if you were to ask me. And then you have Garrett Nussmeier leading the way. I think they're going to put up points. I have no problem with that. The defense doesn't have to be great. It doesn't even necessarily have to be all that good. It just has to be opportunistic. It has to be able to get that sack on a long third down. It has to be able to get that pick right after your team has scored and you have a little bit of momentum going in your direction. So when I look at Harold Perkins, maybe he's not the guy that makes all of those plays, but a lot of the stuff is going to start with him. And he's someone that if this team is going to be what they're capable of being, he needs to just be locked down in that middle of the field and make just so many plays. And maybe it's unfair to put that much on him, but I think he understands that as well as anyone, that this defense, if it's going to succeed, it's going to be that kid leading the way. And then Jalen Milroe is another huge hinge player for me, and frankly, this is a guy that I think could be not only the most important in the SEC, but the most important in the entire country. I heard Josh Pate talking about he thinks Carson Beck is the most important player in the SEC. I would argue it's Jalen Milroe. I think this is a kid that could totally turn this thing on its head, and I think there's this sentiment around Jalen Milroe because last year the big thing around him was those level 2 passes, like we've talked about throughout this week, those NFL level passes that need to take a big step forward. And not to say that this is going to be easy to take a big step forward in, but he's got the right guy to do it. And he's done a lot of really good things in the spring. I've seen different clips and things where you're really honestly kind of surprised by the things that he's doing on the football field in the passing department. And he's someone that I think is just so dangerous. The ceiling with this kid is much higher than people seem to think it is, and I think he could be the best player and quarterback in the country this upcoming year. If he can put together just a little bit more efficiency in those 10 to 20-yard passes, this gets really interesting really quickly. And this Bama team becomes not only a team that can, compete in the SEC, they can win the SEC, they can win a national title. And I'm being totally honest when I say that because I think this kid is that good. I really do think he's that good. I think too many people are doubting what he can do. I think too many people are doubting who he is. And do that at your own risk. I'll be totally honest with you because he's got the coach, he's got the system, he's got the foundation, and a lot of things could go right for this kid. And if they do, it's going to be one of the scariest offenses and definitely the scariest player in the sport. I can almost promise you that. But then let's move over to Ole Miss, and Walter Nolan is the one that I'm kind of circling. Obviously in an A&M jersey there, he is now at Ole Miss, but a very, very important defensive player for Ole Miss because when you look at that D-line, they upgraded pretty much across the entire defense. They did a great job of getting the best players they possibly could out of the portal to fill all of the holes that they needed. D-line was by far the biggest hole, and they brought in a number of really good players to help out with that, but Walter Nolan is the guy. He's the one that really needs to be the difference maker on that defensive line, and if he's not, it could be a little bit of tough sledding, especially in the run defense, for Ole Miss. So I think Walter Nolan's one of those guys that could lead Ole Miss into being a top 20 defense in the country because when you talk about that interior push, it obviously is not the coolest or sexiest thing that happens on the defensive side of the ball. It is easily the most important thing. If you can get push on the interior and you can push a quarterback out of the pocket or at least make him throw a little bit quicker than he's comfortable with, the linebackers are more comfortable guarding running backs. The back end is more comfortable staying on their receiver. Everything becomes so much easier. The pass rush can get there so much easier because sometimes the quarterback gets pushed out of the pocket or sometimes you have to double the guy inside and it gives you a one-on-one with someone like Prince Umanmielen who's going to be huge for them coming off the edge. So I think when you talk about Walter Nolan, he's someone who is an elite athlete. He's an elite football player and he's going to be elite for Ole Miss. And he has to be. If they're going to get the push that they need on that interior defensive line, he's the guy that has to do it. And when they do that, everything else can kind of come into place. Because I do have my worries about some of the other transfer portal guys they brought in and some of the back-end issues or some of the linebacker issues. But if you can get push on that interior, all of that stuff becomes so much easier. And all of those positions that I am a little bit worried about, I'm not so worried about anymore. So that'll be really fascinating to watch because I think when you look at Ole Miss, you always talk about all the really cool trappings, the offense, the back end, all the transfers that they brought in. this is the guy that is going to be the most important for Ole Miss this upcoming year. I know he's in an A&M jersey there, but he is an Ole Miss Rebel now and will be hugely important for them. And then finally, the last hinge player for me is Drayden Norwood. I think this is a hugely important guy, a Missouri cornerback, and kind of an interesting one here because there's tons of guys on Missouri's defense, on Missouri's offense that are going to be huge for Missouri this upcoming season, but when I look back and watch some of the Missouri games from a year ago and you try to figure out, why was this team so good? What was the difference maker that made this team just on a different level? I think it was Chris Abrams-Drain. I think it was that guy on the outside where you could literally just say he's going to guard your best receiver and your best receiver is not going to have the game that he wants to have. It's not to say that he's going to totally lock him down or do anything absolutely insane, but he's going to play really good football on him for 4 quarters. They absolutely knew that every single week, and that's going to be hugely important for Drayden Norwood to kind of step into that position because he's going to have to. Because on the other side, you have Toriano Pride Jr., who I also think is going to be a great player for them, stepping into Enos Rakestraw's position. So you have a lot of big shoes to fill, but I do think this is the guy that can absolutely be that Chris Abrams-Drain type player for them. Be the guy that gets the ball back to this high-powered offense as quickly as possible because that is the goal at all times for Missouri. Be the team that is on offense. If you are on offense and you have Luther Burden on the field, you are going to have good things happen for you 9 times out of 10. So I think that's the biggest thing is this Missouri defense, I would argue, is going to take a step back this year. I don't think it's going to be monstrous or anything like that, but they did lose a ton of really big-time players, including Abrams-Drain, including Rakestraw, including Tyron Hooper. So you're going to have to replace some big-time players. I tend to think Abrams-Drain is the most important one to replace, and I think Drayden Norwood is going to be the guy to do it. And if he can play elite football and just get a couple of picks here and there, get the ball back on your in your offense's hands, this Missouri team is going to be really tough to beat. I can almost promise you that. So a lot of guys that are really, really interesting to break down and definitely will be really, really fun to watch throughout the season. We'll continue doing this throughout the rest of this week into next week likely, but let's take our final break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about Wednesday What Ifs. We're going to do a little bit of a rivalry edition and break down some of the different things that could happen this year that could just turn this entire year on its head. So we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the biggest hinge players in the SEC this upcoming year, broke down 5 different players that I think are just going to have a ton to say about what happens in the SEC this upcoming year. But we'll continue on here, and I apologize for all the technical difficulties. I obviously loaded in a bunch of stuff and it immediately got erased, so not ideal at all, but we'll continue on here. I believe I do not have graphics for this segment. Let me just make sure of that. I do not, but we will definitely break that down and have that totally fixed by tomorrow. I can promise you that, but let's get underway. Let's get into this Wednesday What Ifs and talk about some rivalries around college football. I think this is going to be a huge year for rivalries, and there could be a couple of things that happen that change them really forever. And the one I want to start with is likely the biggest what if going into this season overall. What if Michigan beats Ohio State for a 4th straight time? And this one could be just the most consequential overall because when you talk about Ohio State fans, they could... there are a group of Ohio State fans, I am not lying to you, and I don't necessarily disagree with them. They could be 11-0 going into that game. If they lose that game, they want Ryan Day fired. Period. End of story. I can almost promise you that. They could honestly go on to make the playoff, and if they don't do anything other than win a national title, I think they would want Ryan Day fired, especially if he lost this game. So just to give you an idea, I was born in 2001. Apologies if that made anyone feel old, but I was born in 2001. Growing up, I knew this game was a huge game. I knew it was a huge rivalry game, and I knew that there was so much that went into it. I also knew Ohio State was likely going to win pretty much every single year. That's the way it was when I was growing up. Ohio State just absolutely dominated this game and kind of took a little bit of juice out of it, I'll be totally honest with you, because Michigan just didn't have a lot of things together. They were going through a ton of different coaching changes, not necessarily having a full identity set up there, so Ohio State just controlled it for a very, very long time, and that was just the dynamic. That was the way that things went, and then the last 3 years happened, and Michigan flipped this thing on its head, and now it's Michigan's game, and it's become Michigan's one to lose over the last couple of years. So if they beat them again, if they do this for a fourth year in a row, that means the kids that are coming in as a freshman a couple of years ago will have never beat Michigan. They'll walk out that door having never beat the team that they came to Ohio State to beat. That was part of the recruiting pitch. I can almost promise you that. So, and I think the really interesting thing here is Ohio State has a new AD this upcoming year. Ross Bjork just took the job, I believe on July 1st was his first day, and he's not afraid to make those big-time coaching moves. He was the one that got rid of Jimbo Fisher at A&M with that big-time buyout, so he's not afraid of those moments. And I'm not saying that he absolutely will be fired if this does happen, but I can say pretty confidently that there will be a not small group of Ohio State fans that want that to happen. So that is a game that I've talked about it 10 million times, but Ohio State needs to win it. It's the most need win for anyone of any team across any schedule in this entire year of college football. They need that game. I'm just being totally honest. It is insane how much they need that game. But let's move right along here. And another what if that I'm interested in is, what if one of the most defining rivalries of the next decade, next 5 years, 7 years, is started this year? And I think when we talk about this, I think everyone knows the two games that we're talking about: Oregon, Ohio State, and Texas UGA. Those are the two games that really have the best chance to make this happen, if you will. And I think it's definitely going to be a very interesting thing, because when we got Clemson-Bama for the very first time, we didn't know what we were getting into. We didn't know that we were going to get four just classic matchups that were just incredible, and them going back and forth every single year. When UGA and Bama faced off in 2017, we knew that was a special game, but we didn't know what we were going to get coming forward and how aggressive that rivalry was going to get over the next couple of years. Obviously, it kind of started in 2012, but really 2017 was the kickstart of this new generation. That could happen this year. Ohio State and Oregon, I tend to believe, has the better path to make this happen, just because I tend to believe going forward the the Big Ten is a little bit more of a conference that can be dominated by one or a couple of teams. Just in general, I tend to believe when I look at the SEC, it's going to be really hard for someone to stay up at the top, and I think UGA might be one of the few teams that can pull it off. But looking at that game, I think the Big Ten, the Oregon, Ohio State, could be one that we see just time and again in Big Ten championships, in the playoff, in regular season, just all over the place. And then Texas UGA is absolutely another one. It's kind of like that UGA Bama one for a couple of years, or at least it could be like that, where they meet in the SEC championship a couple of times. They meet in the national title a time or two. They get involved, in the regular season, and there's a lot of energy around that game. And it could be one of those that every single year we look forward to that one, because we know that one's going to be very consequential in the playoff race, could be in the playoff at the end of the day. So there's a ton of really, really cool things that could happen this season, but there's a reality where two teams kind of separate themselves from the pack, and it becomes one of those rivalries that are kind of made out of thin air, but are made out of competitive nature, and are made out of teams just being at the very top of the sport, which are always very, very fun, like the UGA Bama one. But let's move right along. We'll stick with Bama a little bit here, but what if Tennessee gets its second win over Bama in 3 years? Because I don't think that's something that Bama fans are ready for, and I don't think that's something they're expecting to happen this upcoming year, nor should they necessarily, but it's definitely something that'll be really, really interesting because, as I talked about with the Ohio State and Michigan one, Ohio State dominated that rivalry for quite some time. That was kind of the way that I grew up, was Ohio State's likely going to win that game unless Michigan puts something crazy together on a night. But at the end of the day, this one was way worse. Bama just absolutely dominated Tennessee over and over and over again. And in 2022, they finally got over the drought that was 16 years where they did not get a win over Bama. And these guys play every year. So it's just ridiculous how much domination that Bama had over them. But they finally conquered them in 2022. They got over Goliath. They finished that big thing. If they do it again in 2024, that's a huge turning point in the SEC. That's a huge turning point for this rivalry, and that's a huge turning point for Tennessee for a number of different reasons. Because when I talk about Tennessee, I think they're in a position where they are fighting up. They're fighting up to the Bama, to the UGA level of this SEC. But the reality is, if you beat Bama 2 years out of 3, this is now a real rivalry. This is no longer a game that you're just trying to get a big upset in. It's a game that you're winning and you expect to win. It's a game that you think you deserve from the get-go, and it's a game that you don't need a couple of things to go your way to make a win happen. So I think that's the biggest thing here, is it would totally change the way that Tennessee is viewed in the SEC, in the national conversation. It would change the way this rivalry is viewed in the national conversation. I think we'll get a little bit more love for sure, because it's an awesome one that frankly has been tampered down a little bit by the domination of Bama. But I think Tennessee is one of those teams that just has a massive opening this upcoming year, and if they beat Bama, they have jumped through that opening and might not be coming back for quite some time, because this is a powerful program that hasn't quite hit the right buttons, but it feels like they're starting to down there. So it'll be really, really interesting to watch that. And then finally, I want to break down SMU, and what if SMU makes some enemies in year one in the ACC? And this one might be a little bit weird. I might be a little bit alone on this one, but I think SMU is that team that's going to be really disliked around the ACC. And I don't hate SMU. I'm not necessarily saying like everyone should hate SMU for this, and this. I just think that SMU is that team that is going to ruffle some feathers. We've talked about this a little bit on the show, but SMU wields a lot of money. They have some boosters in there that are definitely more than well off, and they absolutely are willing to invest in this program. And it was a little bit stagnant there, and it really was only stagnant because they were in the AAC. They weren't in one of those power conferences that, can realistically compete for a national title. Now they are, and the boosters have really showed out. There was a number out there that I'm not sure how true it was, to be totally honest with you, but I believe it was something like $169 million brought in by this athletic department last year. A lot of that is from the donors, and I think it's going to create a little bit of vitriol between some of the ACC teams. So I think this is a team that kind of has sat in the shadows for quite some time, ever since that death penalty way back in the 70s. It's been impossible to get this program back on top, and why I absolutely hate that anyone ever got that, and no one should going forward. But that's beside the point, totally different conversation. I do think that this is a team that is waking up. This is a program that is becoming the program that they're capable of being again, and I think it's going to piss some people off. I'll just be totally honest with you. I think it's going to make some people really, really mad, and I think the way SMU operates behind the scenes, there are going to be some people that take exception, and especially if they beat a team like Florida State or like Clemson or like North Carolina in their very first year, there might just be some energy there that people aren't expecting right now, but I could see it coming very, very quickly for SMU. So that's kind of just a weird projection one that I'm kind of throwing out there, but I think SMU might be a little bit less popular in the ACC this time next year. I'll just put it that way. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Again, very much apologies for all the technical difficulties. I will totally have that fixed by tomorrow. Something must have happened with the saving of all of that. But at the end of the day, I felt like we went off at least remotely without a hitch today. But we'll get back to normal tomorrow. But thank you once again for listening. Your support means a lot to us. So please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We just have incredible people doing really, really good work across every single sport you could want. So anything you need in the world of sports, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening.